Officer Grant Morgan slammed Raven Cole, a decorated black Navy SEAL, against a wall, choking her in front of her young son. She had committed no crime. 3 minutes later, Morgan was in an ambulance, humiliated, but the system moved fast to twist the truth and turn Raven into the criminal. Now, with lies spreading and powerful men closing in, can she survive the fight to clear her name? If that injustice made your blood boil like this, video share it and tell us what you'd do. Let's get into the story. It was one of those crisp mornings in Crestford when the air felt like it could slice right through you. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet where every footstep sounds louder than it should. Raven Cole walked with measured strides, her black blazer slightly worn, but pressed sharp. She held her son Eli's hand, guiding him toward the bus stop. Eli was only 11, his fingers curled around a silver dog tag that swung gently from its chain, his mother's old Navy SEAL ID tag. He'd been turning it over in his palm all morning, the engraved letters catching the light. "You sure you want me to keep this today?" he asked, looking up at her. Raven gave a small smile. "It's yours now, Eli. Just remember what it means." They were halfway across Oak Street when the voice came low, mocking, dripping with disdain. Well, if it isn't the neighborhood hero." Officer Grant Morgan stepped out from between two parked cars, a tall, broad-shouldered white man with a buzz cut and the kind of swagger that said he thought the whole street belonged to him. His eyes swept over Raven with a smirk. "Former Navy SEAL, right? Guess you're used to being inspected." His gaze lingered, his tone making the word sound dirty. Raven's grip on Eli's hand tightened. "We're on our way, officer. Have a good day." But Morgan wasn't interested in letting them pass. He moved to block their path close enough that Raven could smell the bitter tang of his morning coffee. "Don't walk away when I'm talking to you," he said, his voice harder now. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." "What description?" Raven asked evenly. Morgan leaned in, his smirk widening. "Black, wearing a jacket." Eli stiffened. "Mom, stay calm, baby," Raven murmured, trying to step past. But then it happened, sudden and violent. Morgan's hand shot out, clamping around her neck, shoving her back against the cold brick wall. Eli's scream tore through the morning air. "Let her go! Somebody help!" Across the street, Tyson Reed, a lanky 19-year-old with a camera slung around his neck, froze mid-step. He recognized Raven, everyone in Crestford did, and his gut twisted at the sight. He yanked his phone from his pocket and hit record. Morgan's grip tightened. "You think that SEAL badge makes you untouchable?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. Raven's eyes locked on his calm but unyielding. She could feel Eli's panic, hear Tyson's quick breaths as he filmed, and in that split second she knew this moment was going to follow all of them. Her hands moved fast. A sharp twist of her body, a drop of her weight, and Morgan's grip broke. She spun, hooking her leg behind his and driving her shoulder into his chest. He hit the pavement hard. The wind knocked out of him. Mom, Eli cried, rushing toward her, but Morgan wasn't done. Groaning, he pushed himself up, rage burning in his eyes. "You just assaulted an officer!" Before he could finish, Raven stepped in again, swift, controlled, and precise. A move drilled into her bones from years of combat training. Morgan hit the ground a second time, this time staying there. Blood glistened at the corner of his mouth. His breaths came ragged. 3 minutes had passed since he'd stepped in front of her, and now the sound of sirens filled Oak Street. Eli clung to her side. Tyson kept filming, his voice low, almost like he was narrating for the camera. "This is what happens when they mess with the wrong person." An ambulance screeched to a stop. Paramedics knelt beside Morgan, lifting him onto a stretcher. He groaned, but didn't open his eyes. The red lights painted the brick walls in pulsing waves. Raven didn't move. She stood there, one hand on Eli's shoulder, the other adjusting her blazer. Her breathing was steady, but inside she could feel the shift, the silent, dangerous kind of shift that meant this wasn't over. From farther down the block, the low rumble of an engine cut through the chaos. A black SUV slowed to a stop, its tinted window rolling halfway down. Inside sat Deputy Chief Harris. His face was carved from stone, his eyes sharp and calculating. He watched Raven in silence for several seconds, his gaze not leaving her even as the paramedics loaded Morgan into the ambulance. The SUV didn't move right away. Raven met Harris's stare, reading the unspoken message in it. This wasn't just about a cop getting hurt. This was about to become something much bigger. When the SUV finally pulled away, Eli looked up at her. "Mom, what's going to happen now?" Raven didn't answer. Not yet. Because she knew whatever came next, it was already in motion. Tyson Reed kept his phone steady, his thumb hovering over the stop button. His heart was racing not because he'd just watched a decorated veteran drop a cop twice, but because he knew exactly what would happen next if he wasn't careful. In Crestford, videos like this didn't just disappear. They were erased, lost in evidence lockers, twisted until the truth was unrecognizable. He hit save, then backed it up to the cloud before even lowering his phone. He wasn't about to hand the only real account of this morning over to anyone wearing a badge. By now, more people had spilled out from nearby shops and apartments. The murmurs were growing louder, splitting into sharp-edged opinions. That was self-defense. A man in a delivery uniform said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "I saw it! That cop grabbed her first. Self-defense." A woman scoffed from the other side of the street. "She put him in the hospital. That's assault." Raven stood still, her arm resting lightly over Eli's shoulders. She didn't speak, didn't even turn toward the voices, but she heard every word, each one landing like small stones against a window. Half the crowd was on her side, outraged at what they'd just seen. The other half, louder, sharper, was already convinced she'd gone too far. And then there was Linda Foster. Linda was the kind of neighbor who knew everyone's business before they did. A white woman in her late 50s, hair sprayed into a stiff helmet, eyes sharp behind her glasses. She had been standing near the bakery when the commotion started, and now she was holding her phone high, recording from across the street. But Linda's angle didn't capture Morgan's first move, the choke, the slam into the wall. Her video began just as Raven broke free and dropped him. By the time she posted it online, she'd trimmed it even shorter, adding a caption in bold letters, "Local woman attacks officer on Oak Street." Within minutes, her followers were commenting, some shocked others gleefully piling on. Eli tugged gently at Raven's blazer. His voice was so small she almost didn't hear it. "Mom, are they going to take you away?" Raven looked down at him, forcing her expression to stay calm. "Not today," she said softly. But her eyes kept scanning the crowd, landing on each phone pointed in their direction, each face she couldn't quite read. The ambulance pulled away with Morgan inside its siren fading into the distance. The tension didn't fade with it. If anything, the air felt heavier. A car door shut nearby, deep, deliberate. Deputy Chief Harris had stepped out of the black SUV. He didn't stride forward like a man in a hurry. He walked with the slow certainty of someone who already owned the moment. His uniform was immaculate, his badge polished until it caught the weak morning light. He stopped beside a younger officer leaning in to speak quietly. Tyson couldn't hear the words, but he could see Harris's eyes flick toward Raven, holding there like a warning. Whatever he said, the younger officer nodded, stiff-backed. Orders given. Raven met Harris's gaze from across the street. It wasn't anger she saw there. It was calculation, the kind of look that measured outcomes, not emotions. And she knew that look. She'd seen it in war zones, in rooms where decisions were made about who got to live and who didn't. "This isn't over," his expression seemed to say. Eli's fingers tightened around her hand, and she gave it a gentle squeeze back. She didn't speak the thought that had just crossed her mind that they'd stepped into something bigger than one officer's rage. Because now it wasn't just about what happened on Oak Street. It was about what people believed happened. And that battle had already begun. By the next morning, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Linda Foster's edited clip, trimmed to erase the moment Morgan grabbed Raven first, was plastered across local news sites. The headline screamed, "Local woman attacks officer on Oak Street." No context, no hesitation. Morning talk shows played it on loop, each freeze frame of Raven's defensive stance dissected by hosts who had never been within 10 feet of a chokehold. On social media, the comments were a split screen of America. Lock her up. Another thug who thinks the rules don't apply. A few voices pushed back. It's self-defense. You can see she's protecting herself, but those were drowned out by a tide of anger, most of it aimed at the color of Raven's skin rather than the facts. Tyson's video, the one that showed the whole truth, was still buried on his phone, unseen by the world. At the Crestford Police Department, Deputy Chief Harris called a closed-door meeting. The blinds were drawn, the air thick with cigarette smoke, even though no one dared light up anymore. This, Harris said, dropping a printed screenshot of Linda's clip on the table, is the version we run with. We kill this before it grows legs. I don't care how, just make sure by the end of the week she's the aggressor in every report, every statement, every mind in this town. No one argued. They all knew better. Meanwhile, in a hospital bed across town, Officer Morgan gave his own account to an internal affairs officer, his lips still split from hitting the pavement. "She came at me," he said, voice heavy with rehearsed outrage. "Tried to grab my gun. I had no choice." The officer jotted it down without raising an eyebrow. The script was already written. Back at the small duplex, Raven called home. The mood was different, but no less tense. Marjorie, her elderly neighbor, sat on the worn couch like a sentinel, her hands clasped around a cup of tea she'd long stopped drinking. "Child," she said quietly, "I've seen this play out before. You keep your head up, but you need to know. They're gonna try to back you into a corner you can't get out of." Raven managed a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I've been in tighter corners." Across the room, Eli sat at the kitchen table, rolling his mother's dog tag between his fingers. He looked up, his voice small but steady. "Mom, how many fights have you won?" Raven walked over, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Just enough," she said, "to know which ones you fight all the way." Before the quiet could settle, the phone rang. It was Daniel Scott, the lawyer she'd worked with years ago on a veterans advocacy case. His tone was clipped urgent. "They're building a case against you," he said. "Fabricating, twisting, whatever it takes. You need to brace yourself, Raven. This is going to get ugly fast." Raven's gaze drifted toward the thin curtain fluttering in the window. Somewhere out there, Harris and his people were already setting the trap. Then she replied, her voice low but certain, "We tear it apart piece by piece." It started like nothing. A lazy afternoon, the kind where the sun sits heavy over Crestford and the streets look almost empty. Tyson Reed had just grabbed a soda from the corner store. His earbuds dangled loose, phone in hand. That's when two men stepped out from a parked sedan. Not uniforms, but their posture said everything predators who didn't need a badge to make their presence felt. "Afternoon, kid," the taller one said, voice flat but eyes sharp. "You got a minute?" Tyson slowed, cautious. "Depends." "For what?" The shorter one smiled too wide to be friendly. "Just need to see that phone of yours. Quick look." "You understand?" Tyson's stomach nodded. "They know." He shifted his grip on the phone. "I'm good." The tall one took a step closer. That wasn't a request. Half a block away, Eli Cole froze mid-step. His eyes darted between Tyson's tense stance and the stranger's slow, circling movements. His chest burned as he turned and sprinted home. "Mom!" He crashed through the door, breathless. Two guys, Tyson, his phone. "They're trying to take it." Raven was on her feet before his words fully landed. Marjorie followed, leaning heavier on her cane, but keeping pace as best she could. When they reached the corner, the two men had Tyson backed against a lamppost. "Is there a warrant for this?" Raven's voice cut through the air low but lethal. Both men turned. "Routine inquiry," the tall one replied, giving her the kind of look men give when they think intimidation is the same as authority. "Hand over the phone and we're done." Raven stepped forward until she was shoulder to shoulder with Tyson. "Then you'll hand me a signed warrant. Otherwise, the only thing that's done here is this conversation." The shorter one smirked. "Lady, you really don't want to make this." Make what exactly? Raven's voice didn't rise, but the steel in it could cut glass. That's when the black SUV rolled up. Its door opened with a slow, deliberate click, and Deputy Chief Harris stepped out, adjusting his cuff like he was stepping onto a stage. "Ms. Cole," he greeted that ice-pick smile firmly in place. "Always in the middle of things. Only when the middle is where the truth's being cornered." Raven shot back. Harris tilted his head, studying her like she was a chess piece he couldn't quite pin down. "You're protecting a kid with a video that could complicate matters. I'd call that reckless." Raven's gaze didn't waver. "And I'd call it proof you're afraid of what people might see." A flicker crossed his face, gone as quickly as it came. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for only she and Tyson to hear. "I've ended bigger problems than you without leaving fingerprints." Raven didn't blink. "And I've ended bigger men than you without breaking a sweat." The air between them turned electric, thick enough that even Marjorie's knuckles whitened around her cane. Harris finally stepped back. "Careful, Ms. Cole. Push too hard and you'll find out how far the fall really is." He returned to the SUV door, shutting like a gavel. The two men followed without another word. Tyson's hands were shaking as he clutched his phone. "He's not gonna stop, is he?" Raven's eyes stayed fixed on the retreating SUV. "No. Which means neither will we." Somewhere down that quiet street, the rules had just changed. And everyone knew it. By the next morning, the story had already changed, twisted into something unrecognizable. Harris stood in front of the press, his voice carrying the polished authority of someone who's lied enough times to make it sound like truth. "We have new evidence," he announced, holding up a grainy still frame. The image was pulled from a shaky, low-resolution clip. Raven's figure, blurred and mid-motion, looked like she was lunging toward Officer Morgan. The reporters leaned in, cameras clicking. Harris let the silence stretch, then delivered the headline himself. "This shows a clear act of aggression. A former Navy SEAL, violent and out of control." By noon, the local news stations were running it on repeat. "From service hero to street aggressor," one anchor said. "Crestford's decorated veteran caught in a dangerous outburst," another echoed. In living rooms and diners across town, the verdict was being handed down long before any trial. Meanwhile, Tyson could feel the walls closing in. Every time he stepped outside, he caught sight of the same nondescript sedan idling a few blocks away. Sometimes it was a different car, different driver, but the same watchful stillness. He stopped sleeping in his own bed, crashing at friends' places, moving every night. The phone with the real video never left his pocket. His hand went to it unconsciously, like checking for a pulse. When he finally called Daniel Scott, his voice was low. "I think they're following me." Daniel didn't waste time with sympathy. "They're not just following Tyson. They're setting the stage. Every hour they control the narrative, Raven loses ground. If they lock in this version of events, you could drop the truth tomorrow, and it still won't matter." That afternoon, Raven was in her living room when the television flared with a familiar face, Linda Foster. Perfect hair, calm tone, the kind of performance you'd expect from someone who'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "I saw it myself," Linda told the reporter. "She went for his weapon. I was scared for my life, for all our lives." The clip cut to a montage of the doctored video played over and over until even the lies began to look like reality. Marjorie muted the TV. "They're painting you into a corner, Raven. The more they say it, the more people believe it." Raven didn't answer right away. She just sat there, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the frozen image of Linda's earnest expression. In the quiet, Eli's voice broke through. "Mom, what if they make everyone hate you?" Raven turned to him slowly. "Then we remind them who I really am, and we make sure the truth isn't just heard, it's undeniable." But as she said it, she knew the battle had already shifted. Harris wasn't just trying to discredit her, he was trying to bury her before she even stepped into court. And somewhere out there, Tyson was holding the one thing that could bring it all crashing down. The rain had just started to fall when Raven drove toward Daniel Scott's law office. Wipers beat a steady rhythm, but her mind was somewhere far from the gray streets of the present. The hum of the tires faded, replaced by the crackle of a radio in her ear and the sharp smell of dust and smoke. She was back in the Middle East heat, pressing down like a weight gunfire snapping through the air. "Move them!" "Now," her team leader barked. She remembered sprinting through a crumbling alley, boots pounding against broken concrete, her rifle heavy across her chest. Ahead, a group of civilians huddled behind a shattered wall. One boy, no older than Eli, was clutching his leg, blood soaking through his trousers. "Help him!" a woman cried, her voice raw with terror. Raven dropped to her knees, slinging her rifle over her back. She tore a strip from her sleeve, pressed it to the boy's wound, and scooped him into her arms. His head rested against her shoulder, his small fingers clutching the front of her vest. She could feel the desperate thud of his heartbeat against her chest. "Go! Don't look back," someone shouted behind her. She ran, feet pounding, lungs burning, zigzagging through debris while bullets shattered walls around her. The boy whimpered but didn't cry out. She could feel his trust in the way he held on even as chaos chased them. Halfway to the evac point, she glanced down at his dirt-streaked face, and for a split second it blurred. It wasn't the boy anymore. It was Eli. Eli clutching his own dog tags, eyes wide with the same silent question, "Will you get me out of this?" Her breath caught, but she kept running. She didn't stop until the helicopter's downdraft whipped dust into her eyes. She handed the boy over to the medic, her hands trembling, but she never forgot the weight of him, the warmth, the unspoken promise. The image snapped away as she turned onto Main Street. The rain in the present felt colder than the sweat in her memory. But the truth was the same: she had never left anyone behind, and she wasn't about to start now. By the time she reached Daniel's building, the storm was heavier. She parked, stepped out, and lifted her hood, the water running down her jawline. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt too bright after the gray of outside. Daniel looked up from his desk, a folder open in front of him. His expression was a mix of concern and calculation. "They're tightening the net," he said quietly. "They want you to feel cornered." Raven closed the door behind her, her voice steady. "Cornered animals panic." "I'm not cornered. I'm calculating." Daniel's brows lifted slightly. "Good. Because Harris is counting on you to lose control. That's his only real win." She leaned forward, resting her hands on the desk. "Then let's make sure he never gets it." And in that moment, the room seemed smaller, but her presence filled it. She had faced worse odds in deserts and alleys halfway across the world. She had carried the weight of someone's life before, literally, and she wasn't about to drop it now. Raven wasn't here just to survive this fight. She was here to finish it. By the time Raven stepped into the courtroom, the place was already overflowing. People crammed shoulder to shoulder, craning their necks for a better view. The air felt heavy, humming with that dangerous kind of energy where one wrong word could ignite the room. In the far back, Harris lounged like he owned the place, one arm draped over the bench, the other tapping lazily on the wood. His eyes, though, were sharp and unblinking, fixed on Raven, as if daring her to look back. The bailiff called Morgan to the stand. He walked stiffly, adjusting his tie twice before sitting. As he leaned into the microphone, his eyes flicked to Harris. That's when Harris gave him the signal, just a quick, deliberate nod. "I thought—" Morgan's voice cracked just enough to sound fragile. "I thought I was going to die that night. She came at me fast, aggressive. I didn't know if I'd make it home. A few in the gallery gasped. Someone whispered, "That's her," and another shushed them. Scott rose slowly from the defense table, his movements unhurried like a man who knew exactly where he was going. "Officer Morgan," he began, "you've testified under oath that you feared for your life. But tell me, is it also true that you've been sued 3 separate times for excessive force?" Morgan's shoulders locked. Those cases were dismissed. Dismissed. Scott repeated, his voice steady but cutting, because the victims ran out of money, not because you were innocent. Correct. A ripple of murmurs spread like wildfire through the courtroom. Morgan's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He tried to glance at Harris again, but Harris just sat back, expression unreadable. Outside, the real storm was brewing. 2 crowds had formed on the courthouse steps, separated by a thin line of police. On one side, supporters shouted Raven's name, their voices blending into a steady chant. On the other, signs screamed, "Lock her up and justice for our cops." Tyson was in the middle, phone raised high, live streaming the chaos. Comments flooded the screen, some cheering Raven, others spitting venom. "They're watching from everywhere," he muttered to himself, adjusting the camera angle. Back inside, Raven stayed perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't spoken once, not even to whisper to Scott. Her eyes, calm and unblinking, scanned the room like she was memorizing every face, every word, every lie. The judge called for a 15-minute recess. Chairs scraped against the floor. Conversations burst to life, and the press rushed to the hall. As Raven passed Tyson, he leaned in. "You're trending. They can't stop watching." Without breaking stride, she murmured, "Good. Let them see everything." Harris was waiting near the aisle, pretending to talk with a colleague. As she drew close, his voice dropped to a cold murmur. "You think silence will save you?" Raven didn't slow down. "No," she said, her tone like steel wrapped in velvet, "but it will terrify you." For a fraction of a second, his smile faltered. Then it was back sharper this time. "You're not walking out of here clean, Raven." She paused at the door, turning just enough for him to see the faintest trace of a smirk. "Neither are you." When she stepped outside, the roar of the 2 crowds hit her like a wave. The chants, the shouts, the flashing cameras. It was a battlefield of its own. And in both arenas, one truth was clear. This wasn't just a trial. It was a war. And tomorrow, someone was going to bleed. I'll never forget the way Tyson moved that morning. He slipped through the crowded courthouse hallway like a shadow, head down, hoodie pulled up just enough to hide his face from the cameras. In his hand, just barely visible, was a small silver USB drive. He didn't speak when he reached Scott, just brushed past him and in one fluid motion pressed the drive into his palm. Their eyes met for a single second, enough for Scott to know exactly what this was. When the court reconvened, there was a different kind of tension in the air. It wasn't just anticipation anymore. It was a storm waiting to break. Scott stood. "Your Honor." He began, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made people lean in. "We have new evidence that demands to be seen immediately." Harris stiffened. Morgan's fingers tapped against the armrest faster than before. The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." Scott walked to the clerk's desk and handed over the USB. The clerk slotted it in, and within seconds the monitors around the courtroom flickered to life. At first it was just a blur, grainy footage from a street camera. A few people murmured clearly, wondering if this was just another angle of the same misleading clip Harris had paraded days earlier. But then, the picture sharpened. The video showed Morgan stepping forward, first fast, aggressive. He shoved Raven hard in the shoulder. Then, without warning, he swung. Gasps filled the room. Someone in the gallery muttered, "Oh my God," and a reporter's pen froze mid-scribble. On screen, Raven didn't retaliate right away. She stumbled, steadied herself, and only then moved to block his second strike. It was Morgan, clear as daylight, who initiated every bit of the violence. "Stop the video!" Harris barked, standing abruptly. But it kept rolling. In the back row, I saw two reporters shoot to their feet, snapping photo after photo of the screen. One of them was already on the phone, probably dictating a headline. By the time the clip ended, the entire courtroom was electric. Some were whispering in disbelief. Others just stared at Morgan like they'd never seen him before. Morgan's face had drained of all color. His mouth opened once, then closed, like he couldn't quite find a defense. Harris leaned in toward him, whispering something through clenched teeth, but whatever it was, it didn't put the color back in his cheeks. The judge raised a hand for silence. "This changes the scope of these proceedings. I am ordering an immediate verification of this footage." Right on cue, the back doors swung open and 3 FBI agents entered. The shuffle of their polished shoes was the only sound in the room. They didn't speak to the crowd, just moved straight to the clerk's desk, plugged in their own device, and began running a rapid authenticity check right there in front of everyone. Harris tried to mask his reaction, but the twitch in his jaw gave him away. Scott didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He just leaned against the defense table, watching the agents work like a man who finally knew the tide had turned. And in that moment, you could feel it. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was about to become an unmasking. When the FBI agents finished their verification, the lead agent straightened, looking directly at the judge. His voice cut through the tense silence like a blade. "This footage is authentic," he said, "and the earlier video presented by the prosecution was manipulated. It originated from the office of District Attorney Harris. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room." Harris's face hardened, but the flicker of panic in his eyes gave him away. Morgan shifted in his seat, shoulders curling inward like he knew the ground under him had just given way. The lead agent didn't pause. "Your Honor, under federal authority, we are placing both Mr. Harris and Officer Morgan under arrest." And then it happened, 2 sets of handcuffs, the metallic click echoing through the courtroom. Harris tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Morgan didn't even look up. The room erupted. The people in the gallery were on their feet, the words spilling out in unison. "Justice for Raven. Justice for Raven." The chant rolled like thunder, swelling until it filled every corner of that courthouse. I glanced at Raven. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. Her eyes stayed steady, fixed on the 2 men being led away as if making sure they really were gone. Marjorie was the one who broke the moment. She stepped forward, voice carrying over the noise. "We protect each other," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Or we lose everything." It wasn't loud, but it hit like a hammer. People nodded, some with tears in their eyes, like the truth of it had just settled deep into their bones. Then Eli was there, pushing past the crowd, running straight to his mother. He threw his arms around her, and for the first time in weeks, I saw Raven's shoulders truly relax. Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, worn military dog tag he'd carried since she was deployed overseas. He pressed it into her palm. "You said it was a promise," he whispered. "Now I'm giving it back, 'cause you kept it." Raven's hand closed around it, and she pulled him close again, her chin resting on the top of his head. And just when I thought the day couldn't get any heavier, Linda moved. She had been sitting in the back, silent for the whole trial. But now she walked down the aisle, slow at first, like every step cost her. When she reached Raven, she stopped, her hands trembling. I believed them," Linda said, her voice breaking. "I thought I saw what they told me I saw. But I just watched the truth, and I was wrong." The room had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, thick, raw, expectant. "I'm sorry," Linda said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry for what I said, for what I made people believe about you." For a moment, no one moved. And then slowly Raven nodded, not a full forgiveness, not yet, but something closer to a bridge being built. A woman in the gallery wiped her eyes. Someone else put a hand on Linda's shoulder. And it struck me that in this room, the story wasn't just about exposing the guilty, it was about the possibility of the guilty finding a way back. That day, the badge fell. But something else rose up in its place, louder than the headlines, stronger than the anger. It was the sound of a community bruised but not broken, choosing to stand on the same side again. A month later, Oak Street Park looked nothing like the tense streets we'd seen outside the courthouse. The spring air was warm, carrying the smell of grilled food from every corner. Barbecue ribs, jerk chicken tamales, homemade pies. Laughter mixed with the rhythm of live music drifting from a small stage where a jazz band played under strings of lights swaying in the breeze. What struck me most wasn't the food or the music, it was the people. The same faces that once stood on opposite sides of protest lines were now sharing folding tables, passing plates, and talking like neighbors again. It wasn't perfect. You could still feel the scars. But for the first time in a long time, Crestford felt possible. Near the center of the park, a small crowd began to gather by the stage. Raven stood there, dressed simply in jeans and a navy shirt, her posture relaxed but steady. She didn't need a microphone to command attention. Her presence did that all on its own. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried over the hum of the festival. "Courage isn't always loud," she said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle. "Sometimes it's just showing up, when it matters most." You could see people nodding, some with tears, others with quiet smiles. It wasn't a victory speech, it was a reminder. From the edge of the crowd, I spotted the new police chief, Marcus Holt, a tall man with a serious face but eyes that looked like they'd seen enough to understand. He'd been sworn in just 2 weeks earlier, and he'd already promised open forums, body camera transparency, and a review board with community members. The weight on his shoulders was heavy, but he didn't shy away from it. As Raven stepped down from the stage, I noticed a man standing alone near the food stalls. Mid-40s, sharp suit, despite the casual setting hands in his pockets. When Raven's eyes met his, he smiled, just a faint, knowing curve of the lips, then turned and disappeared into the crowd like he'd never been there. Something in that exchange told me this story wasn't finished. Later, I found Raven at the edge of the park, where Eli was tossing a football back and forth with a group of kids. She stood watching him, her arms folded, but her eyes soft in a way you don't often see from her. "Feels different today," I said. She didn't look away from Eli. "Today's a good day," she replied. "But good days don't mean the fight's over. They just remind you it's worth fighting." Eli caught the ball and came running toward her, cheeks flushed, grinning like he hadn't in months. He wrapped his arms around her waist without a word. She ruffled his hair, and in that small moment I saw something even stronger than her military training, or her courtroom composure resolve. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over Oak Street Park. The music played on the air smelled of food and fresh grass, and the people of Crestford, once divided, stood together in the same light. The battle that began in the courtroom had ended here in this park with music and shared meals. But as Raven's gaze swept over the crowd, I could see it in her eyes. Today's victory was only a chapter. The fight for justice was far from over. Stories like this remind us that justice isn't just a word, it's a responsibility we all share. In Crestford's fight, we saw that courage can be quiet, but its impact can echo far beyond a single moment. If this story moved you, please take a second to hit that like button, share it with someone who believes in fairness, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, meaningful narratives. Every click, every share, every comment, your support gives our team the strength to keep creating stories that matter. Here at Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe that truth told well can change hearts. And that's what we're here to do, one story at a time. Let's keep the conversation alive, and let's keep the fight for justice burning bright.